Sarah Martinez was 35 years old and worked as a pediatric nurse in Austin, Texas. What happened to her sounds impossible, like something from a twisted psychological thriller, but every detail is documented, verified, and true. Her husband told everyone she died in childbirth. He held a funeral, accepted condolences, played the grieving widower while she fought for her life in a hospital 200 miles away. 3 months later, she walked into his engagement party with their newborn daughter in her arms, and the look on his face when he saw her standing there alive was worth every second of the hell he'd put her through. What Sarah did in the moments after that shocked silence changed not just her life, but exposed a conspiracy that had been years in the making. This isn't just a story about a man who wanted to erase his wife. It's about how he almost succeeded, and how one woman's refusal to stay buried brought down an entire web of lies. The story needs to be shared because what happened to Sarah is happening to other women right now. Men who see their pregnant wives as obstacles, who plan elaborate schemes to start fresh with someone new, who believe they can simply delete a person from existence. These are the warning signs everyone needs to recognize before it's too late. Sarah's story begins 5 years earlier, in a coffee shop in downtown Austin on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was 30 years old, running late for her shift at Dell Children's Medical Center, when she literally collided with Marcus Williams at the entrance. Her coffee splashed, his briefcase fell, and they both apologized at the same time, then laughed at the awkward synchronicity of the moment. Marcus was 38, tall and distinguished-looking, with salt and pepper hair that gave him an air of authority. He wore an expensive suit that suggested success, and he had warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He insisted on buying Sarah a replacement coffee, and she agreed, charmed by his gentlemanly demeanor and the easy conversation that flowed between them. He told her he was a commercial real estate developer, managing properties across Central Texas. He'd moved to Austin from Houston 3 years earlier for a fresh start after a difficult divorce. He was honest about his past, or so it seemed. His ex-wife had been unfaithful, he explained, and the betrayal had made him cautious about relationships. But there was something about Sarah, he said, that made him want to take a chance again. Sarah was drawn to his maturity, his stability, the way he seemed to have his life together, in ways that the younger men she'd dated never had. He asked for her number, and she gave it to him without hesitation. Their first date was that weekend. Dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant, followed by a walk along Lady Bird Lake. Marcus was attentive, asking thoughtful questions about her work with children, her family, her dreams for the future. He told her he'd always wanted children, but his ex-wife hadn't been interested. Now, at 38, he worried he'd missed his chance at having a family. Sarah, who'd always imagined herself as a mother, felt an immediate connection. Here was a man who shared her values, who wanted the same things from life, who seemed ready to build something meaningful. Their courtship was intense and romantic. Marcus sent flowers to the hospital where she worked, left sweet notes on her car windshield, planned elaborate surprise dates. He introduced her to his business associates at networking events, showing her off with obvious pride. He met her parents and charmed them completely, discussing investments with her father and complimenting her mother's cooking. Within 4 months, he proposed with a stunning diamond ring at the same coffee shop where they'd first met. Sarah's friends commented on how fast everything was moving, but she dismissed their concerns. "When you know, she told them. Marcus was successful, stable, ready for marriage and family. At 30, she felt she'd waited long enough for the right person. They were married 6 months after they met in a beautiful ceremony at a historic venue in the Texas Hill Country. The first year of marriage was everything Sarah had hoped for. Marcus was affectionate and supportive. He encouraged her career, attended hospital events with her, and talked often about starting their family. They bought a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a good school district, already planning for the children they'd have. Marcus handled all the finances, insisting that Sarah shouldn't worry about bills or investments. He made plenty of money, he said, and he wanted her to focus on her demanding career and preparing for motherhood. Sarah appreciated his take-charge attitude, though her best friend Emma occasionally expressed concern. "Do you even know how much money you guys have?" Emma asked one day over lunch. "Do you have access to the bank accounts?" "Marcus handles all that," Sarah replied. "He's good with money. That's literally his job. Why would I micromanage when he's an expert?" Emma dropped the subject, but Sarah noticed her friend's worried expression. At the time, she thought Emma was just being overprotective. Looking back, she'd see how many red flags she'd ignored because she wanted so badly to believe in the fairy tale Marcus had sold her. 18 months into their marriage, Sarah became pregnant. The news filled her with joy, and Marcus seemed equally thrilled. He immediately started preparing the nursery, buying baby furniture, and painting the room a soft yellow. He accompanied Sarah to every prenatal appointment, asking Dr. Patricia Chen detailed questions about the pregnancy, the delivery process, potential complications. Sarah thought he was just being a concerned, involved father-to-be. But then, small strange things started happening. Marcus began insisting on being present for all her medical appointments, even the routine ones. When Sarah said she could handle a regular checkup alone, he'd become upset, claiming he didn't want to miss a moment of the pregnancy. He started controlling who Sarah spoke to about the baby, saying they should keep things quiet until after the first trimester, then the second trimester, then until the baby was born. He didn't want to jinx anything, he claimed. He also became increasingly interested in Sarah's life insurance policy through the hospital. Did she have adequate coverage? Should they increase it? With a baby coming, they needed to make sure they were protected, he insisted. Sarah agreed to increase her policy to $1 million, with Marcus as the primary beneficiary. It seemed responsible, planning for the worst even though she was healthy and had no reason to expect complications. Around her 6th month of pregnancy, Sarah noticed that Marcus had become distant, spending more time on his phone, working late more frequently. When she asked about it, he'd become defensive, accusing her of being hormonal and paranoid. He'd apologize later, blaming stress at work, but the emotional distance remained. Sarah attributed it to normal pregnancy tension, assuming things would improve once the baby arrived. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been planning for months. He'd been researching hospitals in remote areas, looking for facilities that were understaffed or had poor record-keeping systems. He'd been cultivating a relationship with a woman named Jennifer, a real estate agent he'd met through work. They'd been having an affair for over a year, and Jennifer was pushing him to leave Sarah. But Marcus couldn't just leave. He'd signed a prenuptial agreement at Sarah's father's insistence, and a divorce would leave him with almost nothing. He needed a different solution. The night everything changed started ordinarily enough. Sarah was 38 weeks pregnant, uncomfortable, but healthy. She'd just finished a shift at the hospital and was driving home when she felt the first contraction. It was intense, more painful than the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been having for weeks. She called Marcus, who told her to come straight home and he'd drive her to their hospital, the one where she worked and where her doctor had privileges. But when Sarah arrived home, Marcus was insistent they go to a different hospital. He'd been doing research, he said, and there was a birthing center 2 hours away that specialized in natural childbirth. He knew Sarah had wanted a natural birth if possible, and this place had excellent reviews. Sarah was in pain, confused by the sudden change in plans, but Marcus was so convincing, so insistent. He loaded her into the car before she could really process what was happening. As the contractions intensified during the long drive, Sarah became increasingly concerned. "Marcus, we should just go to Dell Children's. This is too far. Something doesn't feel right." "We're almost there," he kept saying, even though they clearly weren't. He was taking back roads, routes that made no sense. When Sarah tried to use her phone to call her doctor, she realized Marcus had taken it from her purse, claiming he'd put it in the glove box so she wouldn't be distracted during labor. They didn't arrive at any birthing center. Instead, Marcus pulled up to a small, rundown hospital in a tiny town called Clearview, nearly 200 miles from Austin. The facility looked barely operational, with only a few cars in the parking lot and dim lighting in the windows. Sarah was in too much pain to argue anymore. Her water had broken in the car, and she needed immediate medical attention. Marcus rushed her inside, but instead of staying with her, he spoke privately with the intake nurse, a tired-looking woman who barely glanced at Sarah's medical history. He handed over paperwork that Sarah had never seen before, documents he must have prepared in advance. Then he did something that Sarah would only learn about later. He gave them incorrect contact information, listed himself as her only emergency contact, and told them she had no other family. The labor was difficult. The small hospital wasn't equipped for complications, and Sarah developed preeclampsia, her blood pressure spiking dangerously. She needed an emergency C-section, but the facility had limited surgical capabilities. The single obstetrician on duty, Dr. Raymond Miller, was competent but overwhelmed and operating with minimal support staff. During all of this, Marcus left. He told the staff he needed to move the car and get Sarah's hospital bag from the trunk. He never came back. Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl through emergency C-section, but the delivery was traumatic. She lost a significant amount of blood, her blood pressure remained critically high, and she suffered seizures from the preeclampsia. She was unconscious when her daughter was born, unable to hold her baby, or even know if she'd survived. The hospital staff stabilized her, but barely. She spent 3 days in intensive care, drifting in and out of consciousness, asking for Marcus every time she woke up. The staff told her he'd been called away on an emergency, but would be back soon. They had no reason to disbelieve Marcus's story that he'd needed to return to Austin for a work crisis and would come back for her and the baby once she was stable enough to transfer. What they didn't know was that Marcus had no intention of ever returning. While Sarah lay in that hospital bed fighting for her life, Marcus returned to Austin and did the unthinkable. He told everyone that Sarah had died in childbirth. He said there had been complications, that both she and the baby had died, that it happened so quickly there was nothing the doctors could do. He produced falsified death certificates, documents he'd somehow obtained or created. He planned a funeral, accepted condolences from Sarah's devastated parents and friends, played the role of grief-stricken widower with Oscar-worthy performance. Sarah's parents were destroyed. Her mother collapsed at the funeral, inconsolable at the loss of her only daughter and granddaughter she'd never meet. Her father, a retired police officer, tried to get information from the hospital, but Marcus gave him the name of the small facility in Clearview. And when they called, the understaffed administrators simply confirmed that there had been a difficult childbirth and the patient had been transferred. The confusion in records, the distance, and Marcus's convincing grief made it difficult to get clear answers. Emma, Sarah's best friend, was suspicious from the start. Something about Marcus's story didn't add up. Why had Sarah gone to a hospital so far from home? Why hadn't she called Emma during labor like they'd planned? Why wouldn't Marcus let anyone see the baby's body, claiming it had already been cremated per Sarah's wishes that no one knew she had? But Emma's suspicions were drowned out by collective grief. Sarah's funeral was held, her co-workers mourned, and her parents began the devastating process of trying to move forward after losing their daughter. Meanwhile, Sarah was in Clearview, slowly recovering in a hospital that had no idea she was supposed to be dead. When she was finally coherent enough to ask why Marcus hadn't come back, why no one from her family had visited, the staff had no answers. They tried calling the contact number Marcus had provided, but it was disconnected. The address he'd given was fake. A social worker named Patricia Brennan was assigned to Sarah's case. She was the one who first suspected something was seriously wrong. Why would a husband abandon his wife after childbirth? Why were all the contact details false? Why had this woman been brought to a hospital so far from her home? Patricia started investigating, and what she discovered was shocking. She called the police in Austin, asking if there were any missing person reports for Sarah Martinez. There weren't. She called Dell Children's Medical Center, where Sarah had told her she worked. They confirmed Sarah Martinez worked there, but they'd been notified of her death 3 weeks earlier. Her position had already been filled. "I don't understand," Patricia told the police detective she finally got on the phone. "This woman is alive. She's recovering in our hospital, but everyone thinks she's dead. Her husband told people she died in childbirth, but she's here, and he abandoned her." The detective, a woman named Linda Torres, was immediately suspicious. She'd worked enough cases to know that when a pregnant woman disappears or dies under mysterious circumstances, the husband is usually involved. She started digging into Marcus Williams, and what she found was deeply disturbing. Marcus had done this before. His ex-wife, from Houston, hadn't been unfaithful. She'd disappeared 5 years earlier under mysterious circumstances. There had been a police investigation, but Marcus had been cleared due to lack of evidence. The woman's body was never found. Marcus had collected on her life insurance policy and moved to Austin shortly after. Detective Torres immediately drove to Clearview to meet Sarah. When she walked into that hospital room and Sarah saw a police officer, she started crying with relief. Finally, someone was looking for her. Finally, she'd get answers about why Marcus had abandoned her and their baby. "Mrs. Williams," Detective Torres said gently, sitting beside the hospital bed, where Sarah held her 3-week-old daughter, "I have something very difficult to tell you. Your husband reported you dead. He held a funeral. He's been collecting condolences and, I suspect, is in the process of claiming your life insurance policy. We believe he planned this, that he deliberately took you to a remote hospital and abandoned you, intending for you to die or simply disappear from his life." Sarah couldn't process it at first. It was too enormous, too impossible. But as Detective Torres explained everything she'd discovered about Marcus's past, about the fake contact information, about the funeral that had already been held, the truth crashed over Sarah like a physical blow. Her husband had tried to erase her. He'd literally tried to make her disappear so he could start a new life, probably with another woman, probably collecting her life insurance money in the process. "We need to act carefully," Detective Torres said. "Right now, Marcus thinks he's gotten away with it. That gives us an advantage. We can build a case against him for fraud, attempted murder, and whatever else we can make stick. But I need your help, and I need you to trust me on the timing." Sarah trusted her. She had no choice. For the next 2 months, Sarah stayed in Clearview, recovering from the traumatic birth, bonding with her daughter Isabella, and working with Detective Torres to build an airtight case against Marcus. Patricia, the social worker, helped her navigate the system, ensuring Isabella was properly documented and registered. Sarah's parents were not yet contacted because Detective Torres feared they wouldn't be able to hide their knowledge, and she needed Marcus to remain convinced his plan had worked. The first few weeks in Clearview were the darkest of Sarah's life. She was physically weak from the traumatic delivery, emotionally shattered from Marcus's betrayal, and completely isolated from everyone she loved. The small hospital had transferred her to a nearby extended stay facility once she was medically stable, but it was a grim place. Sarah shared a room with an elderly woman named Rosa, who barely spoke English, but who would hold Isabella sometimes and sing soft Spanish lullabies. The physical recovery was brutal. The emergency C-section had been performed under difficult conditions, and Sarah developed an infection requiring weeks of antibiotics. She was weak, in pain, and trying to care for a newborn in a shared room. There were nights when she'd sit holding Isabella and crying, wondering if Marcus had been right, and she should have just died. But Isabella needed her. Every time Sarah looked at her daughter's face, she found the strength to keep going. Isabella deserved a mother who would fight for her, who wouldn't let Marcus win by default. So Sarah fed her, changed her, rocked her through the nights, and slowly grew stronger, both physically and emotionally. Patricia visited almost daily, bringing supplies Sarah needed, and gradually becoming more than just a social worker assigned to her case. She brought baby clothes, diapers, formula to supplement Sarah's breast milk when stress made her supply drop. She brought Sarah's favorite foods from the small town's limited restaurant options, remembering her preferences after a single mention. She sat with Sarah during the long afternoons when Isabella slept, and Sarah was alone with her thoughts, just being present without pushing Sarah to talk more than she was ready to. "You remind me of my daughter," Patricia told her one afternoon. "She's about your age, works in Dallas. She's strong like you, but I worry about her relationship. Her boyfriend is controlling, isolating her from family. I've tried to talk to her, but she doesn't see it yet. Maybe she won't until it's too late, like you almost were." Sarah realized then that Patricia wasn't just helping her out of professional obligation. She was helping because she saw in Sarah what might happen to her own daughter if someone didn't intervene. "Tell her my story," Sarah said. "When this is all over, when we've put Marcus away, tell her everything. Maybe it'll help her see what you're trying to warn her about." Patricia promised she would, and that promise felt like giving Sarah's suffering purpose beyond just her own survival. Detective Torres became another anchor during those difficult weeks. She visited twice a week, always bringing updates on the investigation, and always treating Sarah with a respect and belief that Sarah desperately needed. So many people over the years had dismissed women's fears about their partners, had told them they were being paranoid or dramatic. Detective Torres never once questioned Sarah's account, or suggested she might be misremembering or exaggerating. "I've been doing this for 20 years, Torres told Sarah during one visit. "I've seen what men like Marcus do. The manipulation, the planning, the complete lack of empathy for their victims. You're not crazy, you're not paranoid, and you didn't do anything to deserve this. He's a predator, and you were unlucky enough to become his target." Those words mattered more than Torres probably realized. Sarah had spent weeks questioning herself, wondering what she'd missed, what she should have seen, how she could have been so stupid. Torres's absolute certainty that Marcus was the problem, not Sarah, helped Sarah start to rebuild her shattered confidence. During those 2 months, Detective Torres investigated extensively. She discovered that Marcus had indeed filed a claim on Sarah's life insurance policy. She found evidence of his affair with Jennifer, the real estate agent, including texts where they discussed starting a life together once Marcus was free. She uncovered financial records showing Marcus had been systematically draining Sarah's savings and retirement accounts, transferring money to hidden accounts in preparation for his new life. Torres showed Sarah some of the texts between Marcus and Jennifer, and they were devastating to read. "Just a few more weeks, and we can be together openly," Marcus had written just days after Sarah's supposed funeral. "The insurance money should come through soon, and then we can start planning our life." Jennifer had responded with excitement about their future. "I can't wait to be your wife. Our baby will have such a good life." Reading those messages made Sarah physically ill. While she'd been fighting for her life in a hospital bed, while her parents had been planning her funeral, Marcus and Jennifer had been planning their dream wedding. The callousness of it, the complete absence of remorse or grief, confirmed everything Detective Torres had said about Marcus being a sociopath. But Torres also found evidence that gave Sarah grim satisfaction. Marcus hadn't been as careful as he thought. The small-town pharmacy in Clearview, where he'd purchased the herbs to induce Sarah's labor, had security camera footage of him. The footage showed him carefully reading labels, asking the pharmacist questions about herbal supplements that could trigger contractions, paying in cash. That footage, combined with elevated levels of certain compounds found in Sarah's blood work from the night of her delivery, proved that Marcus had been drugging her to induce premature labor on his timeline. Torres also discovered Marcus's search history on his computer, which Jennifer had unwittingly provided access to when Torres showed up at her door, claiming to need information for insurance purposes related to Sarah's death. The search history was damning. How to induce early labor naturally, hospitals with poor record keeping, life insurance payout timeline after death, how long to wait before remarrying after spouse dies. Can life insurance companies deny claims for childbirth deaths Each search was time-stamped, creating a clear timeline of Marcus's planning. He'd started researching months before Sarah's due date, methodically preparing for every aspect of his plan. It wasn't a crime of passion or a desperate act during a stressful situation. It was cold, calculated, premeditated attempted murder. Most damningly, she found evidence that Marcus was already planning to remarry. Jennifer was pregnant, probably had been for months, and Marcus had proposed to her just 6 weeks after Sarah's supposed death. They were planning an engagement party, a lavish affair at Jennifer's parents' ranch outside Austin. The date was set for exactly 3 months after Sarah's death, the minimum time Marcus felt he needed to wait before moving forward publicly without seeming too callous. That engagement party would be the perfect opportunity for confrontation. Detective Torres and Sarah planned every detail. Sarah would arrive unannounced with Isabella, very much alive, in front of all of Marcus's friends, family, and business associates. It would be public, it would be undeniable, and Marcus would have no way to talk his way out of it. Detective Torres would have officers ready to arrest him immediately on charges of fraud and attempted murder. The 2 months Sarah spent in Clearview were the hardest of her life. She was isolated from everyone she loved, caring for a newborn alone, processing the betrayal of a man she'd trusted completely, and dealing with the trauma of nearly dying. But Patricia and Detective Torres became her support system. Patricia helped her find temporary housing, connected her with resources for new mothers, and spent hours just listening as Sarah processed her grief and rage. Sarah also used that time to get stronger, both physically and emotionally. She worked with a therapist who helped her understand that Marcus's actions were not her fault, that she hadn't missed obvious signs because Marcus was a skilled predator who'd done this before. She researched narcissistic personality disorder, sociopathy, and the psychology of men who kill or abandon their pregnant partners. She armed herself with knowledge so she'd never be vulnerable to someone like Marcus again. She also fell in love with her daughter. Isabella was perfect, healthy, despite the traumatic birth, with Sarah's dark hair and what she hoped was Sarah's temperament rather than Marcus's capacity for deception. Every time Sarah looked at her daughter, she felt renewed determination to make Marcus pay for what he'd done. He'd tried to deny Isabella her mother. He'd tried to steal Sarah's life. She'd make sure he lost everything instead. The night of the engagement party arrived. Sarah dressed carefully in a fitted navy dress that showed she'd recovered her figure after pregnancy. She did her makeup flawlessly, wanting to look healthy and strong, not like someone who'd nearly died 3 months earlier. She put Isabella in a beautiful white dress, prepared a diaper bag, and drove to the ranch with Detective Torres following in an unmarked car. The ranch was decorated elaborately with string lights and floral arrangements. Luxury cars filled the parking area. Through the large windows of the ranch house, Sarah could see well-dressed guests mingling with champagne glasses, celebrating Marcus's engagement to his new fiancée. Her stomach churned with anger and anticipation. Sarah took a deep breath, lifted Isabella from her car seat, and walked toward the entrance. Detective Torres and 2 uniformed officers followed, at a distance, ready to move in once Sarah made her presence known. This was it. The moment Marcus would realize his plan had failed, that she'd survived, that everything he'd built on her supposed death was about to come crashing down. She walked through the door without knocking. The entrance opened directly into the main living area where the party was in full swing. For a moment, no one noticed her standing there with the baby. The party was loud with conversation and laughter. The clink of champagne glasses and the soft background music from speakers hidden throughout the room. It was elegant and expensive. Exactly the kind of event Marcus would orchestrate to show off his success and social status. Then someone close to the door saw her, did a double take, and gasped. It was Marcus's business partner, a man named Richard, who'd given a touching speech at Sarah's funeral about what a wonderful woman she'd been and how tragic her loss was. His face went white as he stared at her, his champagne glass actually slipping from his fingers to shatter on the floor. The sound of breaking glass rippled through the room as people turned to look, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Sarah saw confusion spread across faces as people tried to process what they were seeing. Some of them had been at her funeral. All of them thought she was dead. And here she stood, very much alive, holding a 3-month-old baby who was clearly the child they'd been told died with her. Sarah saw him across the room, Marcus, in an expensive charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt and a silk tie in a shade of blue that Jennifer had probably chosen. He had his arm around a blonde woman with a visible baby bump, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured while talking. They were the center of attention, the happy couple celebrating their future together. Marcus looked happy, completely at ease, celebrating his new beginning without a trace of guilt or remorse for the wife he'd tried to kill. Someone near Sarah said her name, their voice shaking. "Sarah? Is that Sarah Martinez?" The name carried across the room like a stone thrown into still water, ripples of recognition and confusion spreading outward. More people turned, more gasps and exclamations. Someone dropped a plate of appetizers. A woman Sarah didn't recognize started crying, though whether from shock or joy or confusion was unclear. Marcus's head snapped around at the sound of her name. For a split second before he saw her, his expression was annoyed, as if someone mentioning his dead wife at his engagement party was in poor taste. Then his eyes found her across the room, and Sarah watched the color drain from his face so completely he looked like he might faint. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His arm dropped from Jennifer's waist, as if she'd suddenly become electrified. He stared at Sarah, as if seeing a ghost, which was essentially what she was to him, a ghost who'd somehow come back to haunt him at the worst possible moment. Jennifer turned to follow Marcus's stare, and Sarah saw confusion cross her face when she saw another woman with a baby. Then she looked back at Marcus and saw his expression, saw the absolute terror and shock on his face, and her own expression shifted to concern, and then to dawning suspicion. The room fell completely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade away, though it was probably still playing, and Sarah just couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears and the pounding of her heart. People were looking between Marcus and Sarah, trying to understand what was happening, why this woman with a baby had caused such a reaction from the groom-to-be. Someone near the back whispered loud enough to be heard in the silence, "Didn't she die? I went to her funeral. I saw the obituary." Another voice, confused and frightened. "Marcus, who is that? Why does she look like the woman from the photos in your office, the ones you took down after?" Sarah walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, her eyes locked on Marcus. The crowd parted for her automatically, people backing away as if her presence might somehow be contagious or dangerous. Isabella stirred in her arms, but didn't cry, as if she somehow understood the importance of this moment, the weight of what was about to happen. When Sarah was close enough that Marcus could see her clearly, close enough that he could see every detail of her face and know without doubt that she was real and alive, close enough that he could see Isabella and recognize his own features in their daughter's face, she spoke. Her voice was steady and clear, carrying across the silent room with perfect clarity. "Hello, Marcus. I'm sorry I'm late to the party. I was busy recovering from the childbirth you told everyone killed me. But as you can see, your daughter and I are very much alive." The room erupted in shocked exclamations and confused questions. People were pulling out phones, some probably to call the police, others to record what was happening because it was too surreal not to document. Someone was asking if this was some kind of prank, if they were being filmed for a reality show. Another voice insisted this couldn't be real, that Sarah Martinez had died. They'd all been to the funeral. Marcus tried to speak, his mouth working soundlessly like a fish out of water. His hands were shaking, and Sarah noticed with cold satisfaction that he'd broken out in a visible sweat, beads of moisture forming on his forehead and upper lip despite the comfortable temperature in the room. Jennifer looked between them in confusion, her hand instinctively moving to her own pregnant belly in a protective gesture. What is she talking about? Who is this? Her voice was high and tight with panic. I'm his wife, Sarah said, turning to Jennifer with something almost like pity. The other woman was a victim too, in a way, though she'd also been complicit in pursuing a married man. Or I was. I'm sure he told you he was a widower, that his wife tragically died in childbirth 3 months ago, along with their baby. He probably seemed so brave, moving forward despite his grief, giving you and your baby a chance at happiness. Such a devoted man, ready to be a father again, even after losing his first child so tragically. Jennifer's face went white as the implications sank in. She stepped away from Marcus, creating distance between them, as if she'd suddenly realized she was standing next to something toxic and dangerous. You said she died. You said they both died. You showed me the death certificates. You had a funeral. I met your friends at the funeral. They all talked about how tragic it was. The death certificates were fake, Sarah said quietly, never taking her eyes off Marcus's horrified face. The funeral was based on lies. I was alive in a hospital 200 miles away, recovering from the traumatic birth he'd orchestrated, trying to figure out why my husband had abandoned me, and why no one from my family had come to see me or their new granddaughter. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. Sarah. Oh my God, Sarah. We thought you died. The hospital said you died. There must have been a terrible mistake, some kind of terrible administrative error. I've been destroyed thinking you were gone. I can explain everything. Really? Sarah's voice was ice. She felt a strange calm settling over her, the calm that comes from finally confronting the monster that's been haunting you. A mistake? Is that what we're calling it? Let me tell you what actually happened, and you can tell me which part was the mistake. She turned slightly to address the room, wanting everyone to hear this, wanting every person who'd believed Marcus's lies to know the truth. Marcus drove me 200 miles to a hospital I'd never heard of, a tiny understaffed facility in a town called Clearview when I went into labor, not the hospital where I work, where my doctor had privileges, where we'd planned the entire pregnancy to deliver. No, he insisted on this random hospital hours away. People in the room were listening intently now, some recording on their phones, others just staring in horror as the story unfolded. When we got there, he gave them fake contact information, wrong phone numbers, wrong address. He listed himself as my only emergency contact and told them I had no other family. Then, while I was in surgery having an emergency C-section because of complications he may have caused by drugging me to induce early labor, he left. He told the staff he was going to get my hospital bag from the car. He never came back. Gasps and exclamations erupted throughout the room. Jennifer was openly crying now, one hand over her mouth, the other on her belly. Richard, the business partner, looked like he might be sick. I almost died that night, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the tears she could feel building behind her eyes. I lost a massive amount of blood. I had seizures from preeclampsia. I spent 3 days in intensive care, and when I woke up and asked where my husband was, where my family was, why no one had come to see me or the baby, the staff had no answers. They tried the numbers Marcus gave them, but they were disconnected. The address was fake. Marcus was shaking his head, trying to interrupt, but Sarah raised her voice to talk over him. While I was lying in that hospital bed, barely clinging to life, Marcus came back to Austin. He told everyone I died. He told my parents their daughter and granddaughter were both dead. He held a funeral where my mother collapsed with grief. He accepted condolences from all of you. He played the devastated widower so convincingly that no one questioned his story. She paused, letting that sink in, watching the horror dawn on faces around the room. These were people who'd comforted Marcus, who'd brought him casseroles and offered support, who'd attended a funeral for a woman who was alive. And while my parents were planning my funeral, while my friends were grieving, Marcus was here, carrying on with his mistress. He filed a claim on my life insurance policy for $1 million. He'd taken that policy out on me shortly after I got pregnant, told me it was responsible planning. It was murder planning. He systematically drained my bank accounts and retirement funds, and then, barely 6 weeks after my supposed death, he proposed to Jennifer. Jennifer let out a sob and actually sat down hard on the floor, as if her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. A woman who looked like her mother rushed to her side. Marcus found his voice again, and this time it was angry rather than shocked. "This is insane. Sarah, you're clearly not well. Postpartum psychosis is real. You've obviously been through trauma, and you're confused about what happened. These are false memories, delusions. We need to get you help." The gaslighting attempt was so blatant, so practiced, that several people in the room actually recoiled. This was Marcus's pattern, Sarah realized. When caught, attack the credibility of the accuser, make them seem crazy so no one believes them. But Sarah had prepared for this. She pulled out her phone and held it up so people could see the screen. "I have medical records from Clearview Memorial Hospital showing I was admitted the night Marcus claims I died. I have my daughter's birth certificate showing she was born alive and healthy. I have security footage from a pharmacy in Clearview showing Marcus purchasing the herbs he used to drug me and induce my labor prematurely. I have text messages between Marcus and Jennifer discussing their future together and how the insurance money would help them start fresh. I have financial records showing Marcus systematically stealing from my accounts." She looked directly at Marcus, and the fear in his eyes told her he finally understood he wasn't going to talk his way out of this. "I have everything, Marcus. Detective Linda Torres from the Austin Police Department has been investigating you for the past 2 months. She's connected you to the disappearance of your first wife 5 years ago in Houston. She's building a case for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and multiple other charges." The room erupted again, people backing away from Marcus as if his criminality might be contagious. Someone was shouting about calling the police, but Detective Torres chose that moment to enter with the uniformed officers, her timing perfect. She showed her badge and addressed the room with calm authority. "I'm Detective Linda Torres with the Austin Police Department. Everyone please stay calm. Marcus Williams, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, filing a false death report, abandoning a patient in medical distress, and attempted murder." The words "attempted murder" caused an explosion of gasps and shocked exclamations throughout the room. Jennifer was full-on sobbing now, being held by who Sarah assumed was her mother. Other guests were filming, talking frantically on phones, or just standing frozen in shock at what they were witnessing. "You tried to kill her?" Jennifer was screaming now, her voice breaking. "You tried to kill your pregnant wife? You told me she died naturally. You showed me death certificates. You let me believe you were a grieving widower. Oh God, what kind of monster are you?" Marcus lunged toward Sarah, whether to threaten her or beg her. No one would ever know, because the officers immediately grabbed him and forced him face down on the floor to handcuff him. He was shouting now, his composure completely shattered, revealing the rage and desperation beneath. "You're ruining everything. This was supposed to be my fresh start. You were supposed to be gone. You were supposed to disappear." The admission sent a chill through everyone who heard it. There was no more pretense of innocence, no more claims of misunderstanding. Marcus had just admitted in front of dozens of witnesses that he'd wanted Sarah gone, that her disappearance was intentional. "I know," Sarah said quietly, and in that moment she felt strangely calm, almost peaceful. "That was your plan. Drive me far away, leave me in a hospital with no way to contact anyone, hope I'd die from the complications, or just disappear into the system as an indigent patient with no identity. Then you'd collect my insurance, marry Jennifer, and start fresh with her and her baby. It was a good plan, Marcus. Well thought out, carefully executed. Your only mistake was underestimating how hard I'd fight to survive for my daughter." She held Isabella closer, the baby stirring at the commotion around them, but still not crying, as if she sensed she was safe now, in her mother's arms. You forgot that I'm a pediatric nurse. I work with life and death every day. I know how to fight for survival. You forgot that I have people who love me enough to ask questions when things don't add up. You forgot that not everyone is as easily deceived as you think they are. As the officers pulled Marcus to his feet, his expensive suit rumpled and his face red with rage and humiliation, he tried one more time to appeal to the crowd. She's lying. She's crazy. Someone help me. She's making all this up. But Detective Torres cut him off, her voice sharp and authoritative. Mr. Williams, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they led him toward the door, Marcus fought against the handcuffs, craning his neck to look back at Sarah with an expression of pure hatred. The mask had fallen completely. This wasn't the charming man who'd swept her off her feet in a coffee shop. This wasn't the devoted husband who'd attended every prenatal appointment. This was the real Marcus, the predator beneath the facade, and everyone in that room could see him clearly now. As the officers led Marcus away in handcuffs, still protesting, Sarah turned to Jennifer. The other woman was sobbing, being comforted by what looked like her mother. Sarah felt a complicated mix of anger and sympathy. Jennifer had been deceived too, though she'd also been complicit in pursuing a married man. "I'm sorry," Sarah said to her, and she meant it. "I'm sorry you're pregnant with his child. I'm sorry you believed his lies, but you need to know what he is, what he's capable of. Don't let him anywhere near your baby. He doesn't care about children or family. He cares about money and control and his own convenience." Jennifer just nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Sarah's parents burst through the door moments later, having been called by Detective Torres once the arrest was underway. Her mother's scream of joy and disbelief was heard throughout the ranch. She ran to Sarah, nearly knocking her over, crying so hard she couldn't speak. Her father, the retired cop, stood there with tears streaming down his face, reaching out to touch Sarah's cheek, as if to verify she was real. "You're alive," her mother kept saying. "You're alive. You're alive. Oh God, you're alive." "I'm alive," Sarah confirmed, crying now too, letting herself break down in her mother's arms, while her father carefully took Isabella, his granddaughter, he'd thought he'd never meet. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. Detective Torres needed time to build the case." "Don't you dare apologize," her father said firmly. "You survived. You got him. That's all that matters." Emma arrived minutes later, having been called by Sarah's parents. She took one look at Sarah, burst into tears, and hugged her so tightly Sarah could barely breathe. "I knew it," Emma said. "I knew something was wrong with his story. I kept telling people it didn't make sense, but no one wanted to hear it during the grief. But I knew, Sarah. I knew in my gut." The engagement party dissolved into chaos. Guests were leaving in clusters, gossiping about what they'd just witnessed. The caterers packed up in confused silence. Jennifer's family hustled her out to a car, shooting furious glares back at the house, as if the building itself was complicit in Marcus's deception. The legal consequences for Marcus were severe and comprehensive. He was charged with multiple counts: filing a false death report, insurance fraud, identity theft, fraud by deception, and attempted murder. The attempted murder charge was the hardest to prove, but Detective Torres and the prosecutor built a compelling case. The fact that he'd driven Sarah to a remote hospital, provided false information, and abandoned her while she was experiencing life-threatening complications demonstrated clear intent to cause her death. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, that Marcus had panicked during the difficult birth and made bad decisions in a state of emotional distress, but the evidence destroyed that defense. The fake contact information had been prepared in advance. The affair with Jennifer proved he'd been planning to move on. The suspicious death of his previous wife established a pattern. The life insurance claim he'd filed showed financial motive. The discovery process revealed even more damning evidence. Marcus had researched the Clearview Hospital specifically because it had a history of poor record-keeping and had been cited for regulatory violations. He'd learned that patients sometimes got lost in their system, that transfers were poorly documented, that it would be plausible for someone to die there without clear records. He'd planned this meticulously. Investigators also discovered that Marcus had been drugging Sarah subtly during the last weeks of her pregnancy with herbs that could induce premature labor. He'd wanted her to go into labor when he decided, on a day when he could control the circumstances. The night he drove her to Clearview hadn't been coincidence. He'd been watching for signs of labor and potentially triggered it with the substances he'd been giving her. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Sarah had to testify, reliving the trauma of that night and the months that followed. She had to face Marcus across the courtroom while his attorney tried to paint her as confused, possibly suffering from postpartum psychosis, making false accusations against a devoted husband who'd been devastated by the hospital's errors. But the jury saw through it. The evidence was overwhelming. Jennifer testified about the affair and Marcus's promises that he'd be free to marry her soon. Staff from the Clearview Hospital testified about the false information Marcus provided and his suspicious disappearance. Detective Torres presented the financial records showing Marcus's preparations to claim the insurance money. The Houston detective who'd investigated the disappearance of Marcus's previous wife testified about the suspicious circumstances and similarities to Sarah's case. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge showed no mercy. "Mr. Williams, you are a predator who views women as disposable obstacles to overcome when they no longer serve your purposes. You planned and executed an elaborate scheme to murder your pregnant wife so you could collect her life insurance and start fresh with your mistress. Only through her extraordinary strength and the dedicated work of law enforcement did your plan fail. I'm sentencing you to 40 years in state prison without possibility of parole for the first 25 years. 40 years. Marcus would be 78 years old before he could even apply for parole. His face crumpled when the sentence was announced. He tried to turn to look at Sarah, perhaps to plead or threaten one final time, but the bailiff blocked his view and led him away. The financial consequences were equally satisfying. Sarah filed for divorce immediately, and with Marcus's criminal conviction, everything was granted in her favor. She got the house, all marital assets, his retirement accounts, everything. The court also awarded her damages for emotional distress, attempted murder, fraud, and the costs associated with her medical care and recovery in Clearview. Marcus's business partner dissolved their partnership and sued Marcus for damages, claiming the scandal had destroyed their reputation and cost them clients. Several of Marcus's other business associates filed civil suits. By the time all the legal actions were complete, Marcus was financially ruined. Every asset he'd built, every dollar he'd schemed to steal, was gone. Jennifer gave birth to a son 4 months after Marcus's arrest. She filed for sole custody before the baby was even born, and the court granted it without contest. Marcus would have no parental rights, no contact with his son. Jennifer moved back to her hometown in Oklahoma with her parents, trying to rebuild her life away from the scandal. Sarah took a different path. She moved in with her parents temporarily while she processed everything and adjusted to single motherhood. The hospital where she'd worked welcomed her back with full support, offering flexible scheduling and counseling resources. Her colleagues had been devastated by the news of her supposed death and were overjoyed to have her back alive. But Sarah found she couldn't return to the same job she'd had before. The trauma of what Marcus had done, combined with new motherhood, made her want to work fewer hours and focus more on Isabella. She transitioned to part-time work and used her experience to start advocating for better systems to track pregnant women and prevent abandonment cases. She discovered that what happened to her wasn't as rare as people thought. There were other cases of men who'd tried to make pregnant partners disappear, hospitals that had lost track of patients, women who'd survived but whose stories were never heard. Sarah began speaking at conferences about maternal health and patient rights, sharing her story to help improve hospital protocols and raise awareness. She also worked with Detective Torres to help investigate cold cases of missing pregnant women. Sarah's story had exposed Marcus's pattern, and now they wondered how many other men had successfully erased their wives. She helped develop training programs for medical staff to recognize signs of domestic violence and abandonment. If her nightmare could prevent even one other woman from suffering the same fate, it was worth reliving the trauma to share it. Her relationship with her parents deepened in ways she never expected. Her father, using his law enforcement contacts and experience, helped her navigate the legal system and provided security during the trial when Marcus's associates made threats. Her mother became Isabella's primary babysitter, cherishing every moment with the granddaughter she'd thought was lost forever. The grief they'd experienced thinking Sarah was dead made every moment together more precious. Emma remained her closest friend and confidant. She'd been the one voice questioning Marcus's story during the supposed mourning period, and even though others had shut her down, she'd kept digging. Her instincts had been right, and Sarah was grateful to have a friend who trusted those instincts even when it was uncomfortable. The healing process was long and complicated. Sarah worked with an excellent trauma therapist who specialized in domestic violence and PTSD. She had to process not just what Marcus did, but the fact that she'd loved and trusted someone capable of such evil. She had to forgive herself for not seeing the signs, for ignoring the small red flags that seemed so obvious in hindsight. The therapist helped her understand that Marcus was a skilled manipulator who'd done this before. Sarah hadn't been stupid or naive. She'd been targeted by someone who knew exactly how to build trust and exploit it. Marcus had studied her, learned what she wanted, and presented himself as the perfect partner. He'd played a role so convincingly that even people who knew him well were shocked by what he'd done. Sarah also had to decide how to talk to Isabella about her father as she grew up. How do you explain to a child that her father tried to kill her mother, that she only exists because her mother survived an attempted murder? Sarah worked with her therapist to develop age-appropriate ways to discuss it, planning for the difficult conversations that would come as Isabella got older. For now, at 3 months old, Isabella was just a happy baby who knew she was loved. She had her mother, her grandparents, and a growing circle of people who'd rally around her as she grew up. She'd never know her father, and Sarah was determined to make sure that was for the best. Sarah bought a new house, using the settlement from her divorce and the compensation from Marcus's liquidated assets. It was smaller than the house she'd shared with Marcus, but it was hers alone, with no memories of him. She decorated the nursery exactly how she wanted, painted the walls in colors she loved, and created a space that felt safe and untainted by Marcus's presence. She also changed her name back to her maiden name, Martinez. She didn't want to carry Marcus's name for another day. Isabella's birth certificate was amended to show only Sarah as the parent, with Marcus's parental rights legally terminated due to his attempted murder conviction. Isabella Martinez, not Isabella Williams. A fresh start for both of them. 2 years after the confrontation at the engagement party, Sarah stood in a courtroom again, but this time as a witness in a different case. Detective Torres had used evidence from Sarah's case to reopen the investigation into Marcus's first wife, Diane Patterson. They'd found enough evidence to charge Marcus with her murder, even though her body was never recovered. Sarah testified about Marcus's patterns, his methods, his capacity for cold calculation. Her testimony helped secure another conviction. Marcus received an additional life sentence for Diane's murder. He'd likely die in prison, which gave Sarah a sense of closure. He'd never hurt another woman. He'd never have the chance to try this again. Sarah also testified before a state legislative committee that was considering new laws to protect pregnant women and improve hospital patient tracking systems. Her story, along with others Detective Torres had uncovered, prompted reforms. Hospitals would now be required to verify patient identities more carefully, maintain better emergency contact protocols, and report abandoned patients to authorities within 24 hours. The laws wouldn't bring back the women who'd been lost, but they might save future victims. Sarah took pride in that legacy. Marcus had tried to erase her, but instead, she'd become a voice for women who couldn't speak for themselves. Looking back now, 3 years after that terrible night in Clearview, Sarah had learned profound lessons about trust, survival, and the strength people don't know they have until they're forced to find it. She'd learned that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a charming man in a coffee shop who seems too good to be true because he is. She'd learned that red flags should never be ignored, even when ignoring them is easier than facing difficult truths. Marcus had shown signs of control and deception from early in their relationship, but Sarah had dismissed them as quirks or mistakes. She'd wanted so badly to believe in the fairy tale that she'd overlooked the evidence right in front of her. But she'd also learned that she was far stronger than she'd ever imagined. She'd survived complications that should have killed her. She'd cared for a newborn alone in a strange place with no support system. She'd faced her would-be murderer in court and helped put him away for life. She'd rebuilt her entire life from nothing and created something better than what she'd lost. She'd learned that some people are worth trusting. Patricia, the social worker who'd believed her and helped her navigate the system. Detective Torres, who'd invested months in building an airtight case and bringing Marcus to justice. Emma, whose instincts had been right all along. Her parents, whose love and support never wavered. These people proved that while Marcus represented the worst of humanity, there were others who represented the best. Most importantly, she'd learned that being a victim doesn't define you, but how you respond to victimization does. Marcus had tried to make her disappear, to reduce her to nothing more than a convenient death that would solve his problems. Instead, she'd become someone whose story would help protect countless other women. She'd turned her trauma into advocacy, her pain into purpose. Isabella was 3 years old now, a bright, happy child who loved books and playground swings and her grandmother's cookies. She had Sarah's dark hair and, Sarah was relieved to see, Sarah's temperament rather than Marcus's sociopathy. She was kind to other children, curious about the world, full of laughter and joy. She'd never know the father who'd tried to kill her mother, and that was a gift Sarah worked hard to give her. Sarah had also started dating again, cautiously and carefully. She'd met a pediatrician at the hospital, a kind man named Robert who knew her whole story and respected her boundaries. He didn't pressure her, didn't try to move too fast, and most importantly, he treated Isabella with genuine affection. Sarah watched carefully for red flags, trusting her instincts in ways she hadn't with Marcus. She wasn't sure where the relationship would go, but she was open to the possibility of love again, older and wiser than before. Her advocacy work continued to grow. She'd founded a non-profit organization called Second Chances, dedicated to helping women who'd survived domestic violence and attempted murder. The organization provided legal assistance, counseling referrals, and practical support like housing and childcare. Sarah used her own experience to guide the organization's mission, creating resources she wished had existed for her. She also maintained a blog where she shared her story and provided resources for women in dangerous relationships. The blog reached thousands of women every month, and Sarah regularly received messages from women who said her story had helped them recognize warning signs in their own relationships and escape before it was too late. For anyone who sees themselves in any part of Sarah's story, the message is clear: trust your instincts. If someone is isolating you from friends and family, controlling your finances, making you doubt your own perceptions, those are not signs of love. Those are signs of danger. Real love supports your independence, celebrates your connections with others, and respects your autonomy. If you're pregnant and your partner is acting strangely, becoming distant or overly controlling about your medical care, tell someone. Tell your doctor, tell a friend, tell a family member. Don't let anyone isolate you or control your access to medical care. Don't let anyone convince you to go to medical facilities far from home without a very good reason. And if you're in immediate danger, if you suspect someone is planning to hurt you, reach out for help. Call the domestic violence hotline, contact the police, tell your medical providers. Don't worry about seeming paranoid or dramatic. Your safety is worth more than social comfort. Sarah survived because one social worker refused to accept the strange circumstances of her case and started asking questions. She survived because a detective believed her and invested months in building a case. She survived because she was strong enough to keep fighting even when everything seemed impossible. But most importantly, Sarah survived because she refused to let Marcus define her story. He tried to write her ending, tried to make her disappear from existence as if she'd never mattered at all. Instead, she wrote her own story, one of survival and strength and turning trauma into triumph. Everyone deserves a partner who celebrates their life, not someone who plots their death. Everyone deserves a love that builds them up, not one that tries to bury them. Everyone deserves to be safe in their most vulnerable moments, not exploited for insurance money and convenience. This is Sarah Martinez's story of survival. She walked into that engagement party with her daughter in her arms, very much alive, and watched the man who tried to kill her get arrested in front of everyone he'd deceived. She took her power back, reclaimed her life, and made sure Marcus would never hurt another woman. If you've been moved by Sarah's story, share it so others can recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Remember that you're stronger than you know, that help is available, and that no one has the right to erase your existence, no matter what convenient lies they tell themselves. Sarah is alive. Isabella is thriving. Marcus is in prison where he belongs. And every day, Sarah uses her voice to help other women find their own strength to survive and fight back. This is her story. This is her triumph. This is proof that attempted erasure can be transformed into an undeniable presence that changes laws, saves lives, and ensures that women who were supposed to disappear instead become impossible to ignore.